I suppose this is going to be the primary thing I talk about all throughout the year because it does seem to be the main narrative that the establishment is trying to push, right? Right now, people are seriously trying to gaslight you into thinking that Tears of the Kingdom was a failure, that nobody cares about it, that the game was a flop, and that it was eclipsed by several other games like Hogwarts Legacy, like Starfield, like Alan Wake 2. It's remarkable the lengths the shills, the gaming community are trying to go to try to write off Tears of the Kingdom as a failure, right? But what's also becoming apparently obvious to me is that it isn't going to work, right? The attempts at trying to gaslight people into thinking the game isn't being talked about or that it's not popular or that like Breath of the Wild was better are all kind of like falling flat on their face because the reality is that Tears of the Kingdom is a great game that evolves the formula from Breath of the Wild. Yeah, I'm not saying Tears of the Kingdom is better than Breath of the Wild, but they complement each other, right? There is place in the industry for having a direct sequel like this, right? And seeing so many people try and fabricate narratives about this game, try to gaslight you into thinking that Nintendo did something wrong or that there's something incontrovertibly terrible about this game. It's just a cope. It is the reality of what we're seeing here. It's exactly like what happened in 2017 when Breath of the Wild came out, sold the Switch for the entire year. Like people were trying to gaslight us into saying that like, oh, it's not that great of a game. Horizon Zero Dawn was better. The animations are terrible. Nobody actually cares about Zelda, right? And they were continuing that narrative well into like 2019. And I think it wasn't until this year where people finally stopped pretending that Breath of the Wild was a bad game. But it was only because they needed to weaponize it against Tears of the Kingdom. And that's kind of the issue we've been having with a lot of with this coverage of Nintendo products, right? People need to pretend like they're hardcore fans of the company that are disappointed with the current trend the company is taking, right? Otherwise, if you like come clean and you're like Angry Joe and you say like, oh, I don't care about Nintendo, I don't care about Mario, I don't care about Zelda, Pikmin, or any of this stuff. Like, if you do that, like when you criticize the company, nobody takes you seriously. Like, you absolutely have to play the role of the jaded fan if you want anybody to take you seriously. And with Tears of the Kingdom, we've been seeing people do that in full force. You know, people complaining about the NES games, people complaining about like A Link to the Past, people complaining about like, you know, the map design, right? You know, people saying that like, oh, the old games were better. Like Tears of the Kingdom does nothing new or innovative, which obviously isn't true, like at all. But like, to me, it seems odd. It's an odd situation because it feels like I think what's actually happening here is that the shills are like screaming into the void. You know, actual players are happily enjoying the game and talking about it on Discord or through private messaging or whatever, while like the shills on Twitter like just bombard you with like nonsense about how the game isn't popular and how it's not talked about. Like I've talked a little bit about the One Piece community and how weird it is that the primary discussion around the character of Yamato is about whether she's a boy or a girl. She's a girl. And how that seems to be like the pervasive thing when it comes to online discussion of her. But in reality, you know, whenever people talk about Yamato, like whenever she does something or whether she has a role in the story or like her relationship with her father or with like, you know, people talk about like actual plot stuff, you know, actual fan stuff. But like when you actually just look at the general like surface level thing that you'll see on Reddit or whatever, it's like it's just this generic thing coming from people trying to push an agenda, people who aren't actually fans. And I think that's what we're starting to see with a lot of these like entertainment properties is people just spurging out over no reason, trying to make it political, trying to make it like a console war thing, trying to like downplay the game in general, using any methods imaginable, right? They are doing everything they possibly can to try and downplay Tears of the Kingdom. They are desperately trying to act as if this game is some like epic disaster, some epic failure on Nintendo's part, when in reality, it's going to be way more fondly remembered than Hogwarts Legacy, than Starfield, than Final Fantasy 16, than Hi-Fi Rush, than Forspoken, than any of that stuff, than Baldur's Gate 3, right? Like, it was remarkable to me how I look at, like, other Game of the Year lists, Angry Joe's, and see just how irrelevant all of those games are, right? It is crazy to me how, like, basically everything that the industry is trying to put forward this year, whether it's Alan Wake 2 or Spider-Man or, like, Baldur's Gate 3, how, like, none of it has had any staying power at all compared to Zelda. I legit think Tears of the Kingdom is going to be very fondly remembered by people who actually take the time to play it. People who actually take the time to go through the entire thing and, like, experience everything the game has to offer, right? I myself am still, like, going back to the game and finding new things and just having a blast with it. Same with Breath of the Wild, because these games are, like, a cut above other open world games. Like, it's crazy to me that people actually have seriously spent the last several years trying to say that, like, these games aren't good and that, like, open world games are... You just go from point A to point B. Like, I've seen people, like, spout that off about these games, which isn't true at all, especially in the case of Tears of the Kingdom. Like, yeah, it's not something I see a lot of people talk about. It's how, like, Zelda actually makes you think about where you have to go. Like, when you see a quest marker, that's not telling you where you're supposed to go. That's telling you where to go, where you get that hint as to where you're supposed to go. And then you have to use context clues to, like, look around and, like, find hidden caves and, like, solve puzzles and stuff like that. It's really cool, innovative stuff. The game does not get enough praise for that, I think. Like, there's a lot of things like that I think the game doesn't get a lot of credit for. I've seen all these videos of just crazy builds that I've never done. These crazy combos that I've never tried. Like, how inventive people can be with the environment and the gameplay. And, like, I'm looking at this stuff and I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, how can anybody deny that this is Game of the Year? And the reason for that is because they need to continue the facade. They need to continue this farce that Zelda is a niche IP and that people are actually more invested in, like, literally everything else, whether it's Warhammer 40K or Barbie or, like, Harry Potter. Like, we need to just downplay Zelda obsessively because we can't allow Nintendo to be seen as, like, producing the premier fantasy franchise, right? Just like we can't allow them to be seen as, like, a 2D platformers as being, like, a popular genre, right? Like, they keep doing that, Like, it's the links they'll go to kind of deny the reality of the situation is absurd, and I'm really wondering just how long it can continue, because, like, it's not going to be much longer until the people who put, like, hundreds or thousands of hours into Tears of the Kingdom start coming out and start saying, like, wait a minute, Baldur's Gate 3 isn't as good as this. It's not a... Like, if anybody tries talking down about Tears of the Kingdom, it's going to be, like, shouted down, Like, it reminds me very much about how, like, Majora's Mask was really, really hated when it first came out. I remember people complaining about the visual style and the clock and the reused character models and the 4 dungeons. Like, people had so many complaints about Majora's Mask when it first came out. And now it's considered a cult classic, right? I think we're going to see something very, very similar happen to Tears of the Kingdom, right? I think once the differences between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are better understood, and there are plenty, like, when you actually understand how the map has changed, when you actually understand, like, how much, like, Tears of the Kingdom adds to the formula and changes and, like, just makes such an innovative new experience, like, when people reevaluate that final boss fight and realize how good it actually is, like, I still don't see a lot of people acknowledge that, like, Tears of the Kingdom has one of the most Kino endings in Zelda history, right? Like, I still don't acknowledge, like, people talking about, like, the Master Sword pool, right? Like, I still don't see people, like, acknowledging that this was, like, a top-tier Zelda experience, right? Like, I'm not seeing people talk about it yet, but they will. It always happens, I grew up seeing Twilight Princess get shit on. I grew up seeing Skyward Sword getting shit on. A Link Between Worlds. Like Majora's Mask. Like, I've seen this play out time and time again. Like, your attempts at pretending Zelda is some fringe niche thing, they're not working anymore. You know, there's never going to be a Skyrim 2. There's never going to be some random fantasy open world game that comes out of nowhere and just eclipses Zelda in popularity. Like, it isn't going to happen. Like, Zelda has too long of a legacy. It's too well established. It's remained consistently good for too long to ever be overthrown by anything. Like, you can bleed on about Witcher 3's 45 million units sold all you want. You can brag about Skyrim's 60 million units sold. But, like, the reality is, Skyward Sword came out in 2011 alongside Skyrim. And what happened? We got A Link Between Worlds. We got Triforce Heroes. We got Breath of the Wild. We got Tears of the Kingdom. We got a remake of Link's Awakening. All of which of Kino. Like, all of that was Kino, right? What did CD Projekt Red give us? What did Bethesda give us? Absolute jack shit. Okay, that is the reality of what we're seeing now, is that, like, these companies that were propped up as, like, the Zelda killers, you know, the Okamis, the Dark Clouds, the Final Fantasies, like, they're all falling by the wayside, while Zelda still remains very, very, very much relevant, right? All anybody can do is just try to delude you into thinking that there are better games out there, but they can't name them or come up with any adequate explanation as to why they're better, other than the fact that, like, oh, Tears of the Kingdom reuses the same map as Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild. It has the same engine. Bro, like, Baldur's Gate 3 runs on, like, what, like, the D&D rule set? Bro, like, can't you just argue that Baldur's Gate 3 is the same as, like, every D&D game in existence, right? Can't you just say that, like, it's the same kind of uninspired, like, no, of course you're not going to say that, because you can't say anything bad about Baldur's Gate 3. You're not allowed to. But Zelda, you're supposed to, like, talk down about this IP all the time just because it's a Nintendo exclusive. And we are going to keep seeing this narrative play out time and time again over the next several years until we get that announcement trailer for the next Legend of Zelda project.